How often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants. Today, I will be in conversation with Reverend Danae Ashley, an Episcopal priest and licensed marriage and family therapist. I first interviewed Danae at the beginning of last year when she was working on her book, My Sap is Rising, based on her pilgrimage with St. Hildegard von Bingen and her work as an Alderian therapist. That book is now a reality, and it is exciting to be able to explore how she interprets the intersection of spirituality, psychology, and the mystical experiences that shape our understanding of God and ourselves. Expect to learn about the role of Christian mystics, the significance of personal rituals, and how our stories connect us to the divine. Danae, welcome to Liturgical Rebels. And it is so good to finally have you here and be able to chat to you about your latest book, or your only book, I think, My Sap is Rising.
Yes. I've contributed to other things, but this is my baby, so to speak. Yes.
Well, let's start by finding out, to me, a liturgical rebel is somebody who thinks outside the box about what spiritual practices are and how we connect to God. And I know you fit into that category. But tell me, what do you think qualifies you as a liturgical rebel?
I love this question. I pondered it before we got together. I was thinking, what examples could I use? So many, my whole life. I feel like in a world that values expediency and outcomes and measures things by success in the sense of money and influence and things like that, I feel like just even being a Christian, like following Jesus, is being a liturgical rebel because it is so countercultural. For myself, I have always known the presence of God since I was a child, and there's something about God's presence in a mystical fashion that I never had words for until I went to my Master of Divinity program at Gonzaga University in Spokane. And I took a class on the Christian mystics, and it focused on 3 mystics. And for me, that was finally the language. I was like, oh, this is what it is. There's something beyond myself that I couldn't express with words or even with art or expression, just something beyond. And the mystics are not they haven't been very popular, although they are making a comeback right now because I think that they are very needed. We need to have the mystical hope that mystics throughout history have had in communing with God. But for me, it's just always been very connective, deep, unexpressible in a way, because it's such a personal thing. And at the same time, it enhances everything that I do and how I teach people about God and how I look at creation and the interwovenness of everything. So I wanted to just start there and say, I feel like being a mystic is something that is foundational for me in my liturgical rebellion. And
I suspect that is my next question. The main thing that makes you feel close to God, is that right?
Yes, yes. Well, just yeah. And I remember in my class at Gonzaga, the professor said, and what is we were like, well, what is a mystic? What makes a mystic? Do you have to have visions? Do you have to have this? Do you have to have that? And he was like, a mystical experience is any intense encounter with the divine that you have.
Mm.
And he's like, that's mystical. And I was like, well, that's like everything. and and he's like, yeah, and so that gave me a broader sense of what mysticism could be. You don't have to just be having visions. I mean, everyone, excuse me, no matter what kind of faith background you have, when you have like an intense experience of God, that is a part of being a mystic. It's a
Mm.
mystical experience. It's something beyond. And the church, we have a responsibility to give language to that stuff. And people are experiencing that. So for me, being close to God is, it can come at random. It could come from reading poetry. It could come from being in the garden, which I have
Mhm.
a similar love for a garden that you do. It could be from, I mean, even watching my dog play, just the the swelling up of this interconnectedness of being, not only to myself but to God and to creation around me. I feel like that is where it begins, and then it kind of it goes out into the world in ways for me where I would say, like, within the institutional church structure, um, I would do rituals that were very personalized to give form, to give some, like, framework to an experience of God that people are having, but I would do them in a very personal way. So, for example, in some parishes that I've had, I would do like a ritual for children who were turning 12 or 13, because we don't have something like that in our Christian tradition per se. I mean, some places do confirmation, but I have a lot of feelings about doing that at that age. But just having some sort of rite of passage, um, doing things for families or couples, around significant events in their lives. So for me, it extends into, then this mystical experience goes into ritual that can hold the big feelings and the big transitions in life. And I and there was a conference that I participated in that they invited me to. It was a peer-led conference, and I was invited to talk about something, exciting that I was doing in my parish. And that is what I presented, and people were just not. They didn't think it was interesting, and they were wanting things like, how do you grow your church? And I'm like, well,
Yep.
this is actually how you connect. You help people connect more deeply with God and foster discipleship by being together, by doing something that connects them to their ordinary life in a
Yep.
mystical way. And
Wonderful.
so that's where I feel like that's how it kind of flows out through me, and how God works through me to do that.
I love it. So, apart from your book and mysticism, what is one thing in your life that you're passionate about? Just a few sentences, so
Oh
it
my
doesn't have to be
gosh. Oh my
one thing.
gosh. Yeah, I know one thing. Christine, you know me. This is going to be
Yep.
tough. Um, I am passionate about other people's stories.
Mm.
I love This is why I do the work that I do. I'm also a psychotherapist, and people are brave and courageous in their ordinary lives. People are walking around with these incredible stories that no one has any idea about. And to discover those and to be able to journey with people, whether as a priest or as a psychotherapist, sometimes, I mean, both. I mean, you get all of me with both things, but the immense gratitude that I have for them in sharing so deeply with me. There's nothing like it. And it's amazing to be able to cheer people on and to encourage them and to already see the strength that they have and help them to use that. And oftentimes, their faith is part of that, and to remind them of that. I mean, it's so
Mhm.
powerful. And to see God's story, to see them as part of God's story and God's story in them, I'm deeply passionate about that. I love supporting other people in their stories because it
I
is
love
God's
that.
story.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, let's get on to your book,
Mhm.
because obviously one of your passions at the moment is your book, My
Yes.
Sap is Rising.
Yes.
Well, and I love your description on the back cover.
Yes.
What do a revolutionary 12th century German Benedictine nun, the 20th century founder of individual psychology, and a modern day Episcopal priest and psychotherapist have in common? And I think that's a great place to start. What
Yes,
do
and I
you
want to
think that they have
say
in common?
yes, I want to say I wrote that.
I thought you
It's
did.
not
Yeah.
AI.
No, I thought you did. And I think it's just a great place to start in talking about your book.
Yes, yes. So basically the book, people that know me and have read the book, they're like, "Oh, yes, this would be the book that you would write." Because it is those strands of my life coming together in a very unique and particular way. So, first of all, I'm an Episcopal priest, been a priest for 18 years now, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. Been a psychotherapist for, 12. So those pieces, the spiritual life, the psychological life coming together, it's part of making me. So that's what they have in common with me. But as for the Hildegard in particular and Adler, I have stories about how I came to be journeying with them, and how they came to journey with me, and compelled me to write this book. But yeah, so the connections are vast. I mean, you cannot separate the body, mind, and spirit from one another. And so to me, it all made sense
Mhm, mhm.
to do
Oh,
this.
no. No, I think so. I think so. Well, so let's get a little more into these characters.
Hmm.
Hildegard von Bingen,
Yes.
I've always been impressed with her because in some ways you could say she's the first female doctor that we
Yes.
really read about
Hmm.
in the Western world.
Hmm.
Um, and, because of her holistic approach to health and wholeness, even though it might be a little bit different from what we would think about today.
Yeah.
Uh, and you refer to her as a Christian mystic, a
Yes.
visionary, a healer, a
Hmm.
preacher, a musician, a composer, an environmentalist, a writer, a language creator, and a
Yes.
deviser to many. And I think,
Yes.
and that was all done from a little cell,
Yes.
basically.
Well, yes,
Um,
yes, in some part, yeah, she did expand later, but
Yeah.
yes.
So tell us a little bit about her life and what really attracted you to her approach, and what intrigues you about her.
Yeah. So Hildegard of Bingen was born in 1098, and she lived to 1179, so she was 81 when she died. So if you think about this, that is a
That's pretty
amazing
good.
lifespan for the 12th century. She was dedicated to the church from birth. I mean, her parents knew they had many children, and they knew that she was going to be going to the church in some form. She saw visions from a very young age, and we actually have her writings. The reason that I think she's so fascinating is because we actually have a lot of writing from her.
Mhm. Yeah.
We have
She was
we have
very
her
prolific. Yeah.
Yes, we have her major works. We have letters. We have over 400 letters back and forth between her and various people in that time period. So we have a lot of information about her. And she had saw visions from the time she was very young. She wrote about that experience. And what happened was she would tell people because she's a little kid, and they were like, what's going on here? And she eventually realized, okay, I'm not gonna share these
Mm-hmm.
anymore because people don't know what they are or what's going on, and I need to fit in and do the things, right? So she kind of suppressed that for a very, very long time, and she went to live with her kinswoman, Yuda of Sponheim, who had her own piety. She was a very pious woman. She had her own following because she was a young noblewoman who had dedicated her life to God after having a serious illness when she was, I think, 11 or 12 or something like that. And so she said, I will not marry. I'm going to dedicate my life to God,
Mm.
something to that effect. Um, and so she went to live with her when she was 8, and then they went to live at the Dizzy-Bodenberg Monastery. And this is all happening. I should set the stage. This is all happening in the Rhine Valley, so
Uh-huh.
very close to Bingen, but the Dizzy-Bodenberg is kind of southwest of that area.
In
Um,
Germany, for
in
those that
Germany,
are
yes.
not good
Sorry.
with their geography.
Yeah, I know. I know, and I know your listeners are global. So, yes, in Germany, in the Rhine Valley, for modern day people, if you think of if you would go there now, you'd fly into Frankfurt, and it's very close to Frankfurt. It's south of Frankfurt, that the area that she was in particular, because the Rhine obviously goes all the way
Mhm.
through and goes to other countries and stuff. So then they went to the Dizzy-Bodenberg, and she was 14 years old, and that's when they were sealed up as anchorites with another young woman, as far as we know. Um, so there was 3 of them, and they were sealed up in the outside of the Church of the Canons. And for people that don't know what an anchorite is, it is someone who lives like in an enclosure where there's only like a window to
Mm.
pass things through, and it's usually built off the side of a church or a chapel of some kind, so that the person or people living in it can participate in the daily prayer life and can hear the prayers going on and the psalms being chanted and all that kind of thing. So they were enclosed there, and Yuda was probably about 20. We think she's about 6 years older than Hildegard, and we don't have a lot of information about the other young women. But eventually, they they attracted more young women, and
It
so more
it's so
people.
fascinating, isn't it, that from this little cell,
Yes,
they can attract other people to them.
yes. Well, and in the Middle Ages, it was kind of like, well, what do women do?
Yes. Mhm, mhm.
You get
Yes.
married, or if you have lots of daughters, a lot of them would go into
Into the
the
church,
church
yeah.
life. And so to find someone like Yuda, who was very pious and who was fostering these other young women in the faith, that would be a very noble thing to do. And also, the Dizzy-Bodenberg at the time, so they were under the abbot's reign, or the abbot's uh, not rule, but his leadership, let's just say. Um, so the Dizzy-Bodenberg itself, that monastery, got their dowries. So because they didn't have their own order. So it was very lucrative
Yes,
for the
for the
abbot to be
mhm.
advertising, oh yes, we have these people too. So anyway, so eventually they did outgrow that space, and then they moved into like more regular quarters in the Dizzy-Bodenberg. So it was really a shared house, a shared monastery in some ways, and we don't have details on that, but we do. That's modern scholarship, at least as far as we know, that's what we believe. So Yuda obviously eventually died, and after that, Hildegard was elected as magistra of the convent at the Dizzy-Bodenberg, and she eventually had a vision. And I'll tell a little bit about her visions too. But she eventually had a vision where God was like, "You need to move to another place to have a convent." And it was at St. Rupertsberg, which was a site very near Bingen, modern day Bingen now. It's kind of encompassed it. But there was a site there where St. Rupert and his mother had established like I would say like where they really helped people who were dying, helped poor people, and that had been long established. But she needed to rebuild it. There was like a ruin. It was a ruins, and she was rebuilding something. So anyway, that was a big move. So they moved there. She and I think like, I don't know, 20 nuns maybe. And that move was tough because it took a long time for them to get everything built, but they were faithful to God's call, and it eventually became a very flourishing place right on the Rhine, which was great for Hildegard because she got to, it was a lot more, there was a lot more interaction with the outside world, even though they were cloistered Benedictine nuns. So her visions, let me just backtrack a little bit and say, so she kept having these visions, but she didn't tell anyone. She did tell Yuda, and she eventually told her, I would call this man her Anam Cara. I mean, Yuda was her mentor and definitely a soul friend as well. But like there was this priest, monk and priest named Volmar, who became her closest advisor, and he was at the Dizzy Bonenberg as well. And she eventually told him, and because God, in her, as she writes in her Scivias, in her 42nd year, she was compelled by God to write down these visions, and she didn't know what to do because God had never, I guess, spoken to her in this way, like, you have to write these down. So she told Volmar about this. She told Yuda, she told Volmar, and they advised her, oh, we think this is from God. We need to tell the abbot. And so there was this chain of events where then the abbot finds out, and so they're like, okay, let's find out if this is from God. And she also is very politically savvy because remember, she's from a noble family. So there are other people in political places, both secular and in the church. And she lived during a very turbulent time, much like today in a lot of ways. There was a lot of spiritual turbulence in the church world at that time. There were people were fighting, and there were popes and anti-popes and all sorts of stuff happening. And then in the secular world, there were a lot of the different German kingdoms were fighting, and emperors were being declared, and there's just a lot going on politically, both spiritually and secular, in the secular world. So she wrote to Bernard of Clairvaux, who was in France and very famous even at that time, for his I think he was a Cistercian monastery. And she said, oh, I'm but a poor woman. She often wrote this way. I'm but a poor woman. I'm a worm before God, that kind of language. I don't know anything. I'm uneducated, but God has given me these visions. What do you think? And so eventually there ended up being a gathering where the Pope came, and they ended up talking about Hildegard and her visions. And the Pope eventually, and there's a lot to that story, but the outcome is the Pope gave his blessing in her continuing to write down the visions and having Volmar write them down for her. So he worked as her secretary, basically, for
It's
many, many
amazing,
years.
isn't it, that it actually went to the Pope for her
Yes.
to write it down. And
Yes.
of course, I think who would have ever imagined that people would be being inspired by these important visions and writings
Yes.
800 years later?
Right?
It's
Yes.
it's mind-boggling, really.
Yes. No, it really is. And at that time, a question I get a lot is like, how was she not burnt at the stake? Because she was, like, having visions. She was also what we would call a polymath. I mean, she was an incredibly gifted person.
Yes.
High energy, was composing music, writing music, performing things, and within her convent, and also writing letters to the popes and to kings and to other priests and monks and like all these things. She was, and to regular people, and praying for people and writing down, all of her healing works. We have Physica and Causes and Cures. Those are the two main works that we think Hildegard wrote, or at least are from her tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So she was doing all these things, and she was also sick all the time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
constantly ill. She writes about it a lot, about how she was ill. So it's very interesting to me, like, that how being a conduit of God, really giving oneself over to being a vessel of God and utilizing all these gifts, like, what does that do to the human body? And she said that she had been quite ill, even as a child. She says, I think from her mother, with her mother's milk, she was kind of sickly.
Mm.
So she had always been sort of like her body had always been maybe perhaps more weak in some way. But she ended up living to be 81, which in some ways is not surprising, because being in a convent, she was protected and had better care for herself,
Mm-hmm.
and just, very good, wholesome food, that kind of stuff. But also, she was sick all the time, and it just seemed like she was constantly producing stuff.
Yeah.
Think about a
Well,
garden just like constantly producing. By the end of the summer, you're like, oh my gosh, we
it's
need to be done.
interesting to me because I know several um, really wonderful Christian people, contemplatives, mystics, writers,
Hmm.
artists who have chronic illnesses.
Yes.
It often seems to be an accompaniment, whether it's because that illness kind of slows you down to a point that you can focus on these other things, or what, I
Right.
don't know, but there's often a real connection I've found.
Yes, I know. It's fascinating. Like, which came
Yeah.
first, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe they both just come together. I don't, yeah. Yeah, it's
Well, and
very interesting.
I know I didn't have this on my list, but one of the things that I've wondered about, because I know it's another question that's raised about her, as it is about Francis of Assisi and other um, well-known leaders, is were they schizophrenic?
Oh
Uh,
gosh, I have a whole chapter in my book about that.
yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's an important question
Yes.
because of the fact that we have so denigrated people with
Mm-hmm.
what we think of as, uh, mental illnesses that mean that they're persona non grata.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then to look at these people throughout history who probably um, had these, what we think of now as afflictions, and yet
Mm-hmm.
were incredible um, contributors to the spiritual development of our world.
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, we are the body of Christ. We need all the gifts.
Yes, yes, and
And
often it
mhm.
comes through people that we think of as persona non grata.
Right. Well, yeah, and isn't that scriptural? Isn't that
Yeah.
from, really from our tradition? Yeah, just touching briefly on that, I would say, you know, you and I both know, as medical professionals, like, it's dangerous to diagnose someone that you don't know. you
Particularly
know,
from 800 years away.
Right, right, and we only have what we have, right? You know, but there is something about that, though. People do wonder. I mean, there's been a long historic tradition, like in Hildegard studies, where people thought, oh, well, she had migraines, and all these kinds of things, and trying to like diagnose it away. And so my question in my book is, what? Why couldn't it just be a vision
Yes,
from God?
yes, yeah,
Why not? Why do we
yes.
have to diagnose? Why do we have to pathologize spiritual happenings? And I think that's in the beginning of our conversation. That's what I mean. Yes, if voices are telling you to kill someone or kill yourself, or that, I mean, that's a whole other thing.
Mhm,
Mentally and spiritually, that's different. But it's that mystical connection.
mhm,
Why would we rule out that she's actually having a spiritual experience, and this is the outcome of it? um Another thing that's been brought up in recent times is that there's a lot of discussion around neurodiversity. And was she neurodiverse in some way? Did she have ADHD? Did she, have autism? All these things. But she's, all this stuff. I mean, and it was very interesting in my research is that there are people out, scholars who are studying like for autistic people, was a monastery or a convent the best place for them? Like they could actually thrive because they could have special interests. But they also had the structure and order of the day.
Yes.
And then they were in community, so they were safe. So there's something to be said about that too. Anyway.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on for a moment at least to Alder, who lived long after Bingen.
Oh, yes.
But has also had a very big impact on your life and on the writing of this book.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about that and why you chose to weave the lives and the work of these two people together.
Yes. Oh, that's very easy for me to do. Okay, so Alfred Adler. I love him. I just went to the big North American Society of Adlerian Psychology conference a few weeks ago. So I got to be with other Adlerians and just to be like infused and reminded of the energy of Adler. So Adler is kind of an unsung hero in psychology. A lot of things that we have today are actually based on what Adler was doing in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And he died in 1938, I believe. And there was just such there's so much I could say. So with Adler, the reason that I ended up finding out about him was because I had moved to the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, and he died in 1937. I had to check myself. I knew it was something around there. Okay. So I moved to the Twin Cities, and through various means, I ended up meeting Dr. Megan Williams, who I was just really impressed with. I was impressed with her style of therapy, and I had not become a therapist at that point. I knew I wanted to, and I was serving a church there, and I ended up talking to Meg, and I said, where did you go to school? Because I'm ready. I'm ready to start doing that degree now. And she said, oh my gosh, I went to Adler Graduate School in the Twin Cities. And I was like, Adler Graduate School? I've never heard of that. Because I was looking at University of Minnesota, blah, 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 psychology degrees. So she said, oh yeah. She goes, the reason I am the way I am is because I went to Adler. And I was like, who is this person? Like, what's going on? So that's how I ended up going to Adler Graduate School. And I fell in love with Adler because Adler, so for your listeners, if you've never heard of Adler, Adler was a contemporary of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. They were all in Vienna at the same time. They all knew each other. Jung and Adler were having conversations with Freud. Both of them sort of broke away from him. Adler did it first, I believe, and then Jung did it later, but not very much later. And Adler would rarely say anything publicly bad about Freud. He was very careful about that, but yeah, he was not into Freud's theories at all. Adler looked at the whole person. So he was much more interested in, because he was a doctor first. So he was a physician and ophthalmologist. And so he was looking at how does the body also influence behavior and what happens in the mind. And that holistic vision, that's why he called it individual psychology, because it was about it was a individual, like each person is indivisible. That's what I'm trying to say. And so you can't separate out the body and what's happening with the mind because they're all influencing each other. And so he had a lot of theories around however you were born, like with the body that you have, you're going to have a proclivity for certain things. And so, then psychologically you have these perceived pluses, perceived minuses, and you're always moving toward what he called the final fictional goal, which when you're a child, you look around the world and you say, okay, this is how the world is, and this is what I need to do to find safety, security, and belonging, also known as love, and survive my family of origin.
Mm.
And so that's how we end up with, as an adult, maladaptive habits, because as a child, our brain isn't developed. We're trying to survive. Even if you have a great, loving family, there's still things that happen. You're like, oh, okay, this is how I need to be in the world in order to function and in order for me to get my needs met. And so he was always looking at behavior. One of his famous quotes is trust only movement. Don't trust what people say, like trust how their behavior is and trust their movement.
Mm-hmm.
So he built his lifestyle, what he called the lifestyle, on encouragement and looking at people's strengths and how do you build on strengths. And how do we get people to go to the useful side of life, as he called it, instead of the useless side of life? And so this type of psychology really appealed to me because I felt like this could be definitely applied to my situations in church. And also he was a family systems therapist. So before it was really like family systems was a thing, he was looking at your family constellation. That's what he called it, the family constellation. What's you're embedded first socially in your family, and everything for him around mental health. He was known to say that good mental health cannot happen without community because we are social creatures.
Amen.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And isn't that so needed for today? So,
Yes.
I mean, I could go on and on. There's many reasons why I love him, but those are kind of
Yep.
his some of his tenets. But the reason that I put the two together is, and I remember exactly when it was happening. So when I went on my pilgrimage to the Hildegard of Bingen Pilgrimage Way,
And we'll talk
in
about that next. Yeah.
yeah, in May of 2023, I was post-surgery. I was 6 weeks post-surgery.
Talk
I'd
about
had
crazy.
I know, I had I didn't realize I'd be going on pilgrimage. It's a whole thing. But I had bunion surgery the year before, and the screws in my foot, I'm sorry for those that are squeamish, I'll just say, I had to have them taken out. Let's just say that. And so was 6 weeks post-surgery on my foot, and in a pilgrimage, you're supposed to be walking. Danae was not necessarily walking a pilgrimage. So I drove to a lot of the pilgrimage sites, and I was following this guidebook by the amazing Dr. Annetta Esser, who is now a friend and colleague of mine. So anyway, as I was driving, a friend of mine had seen on Facebook that I was doing the Hildegard Way, and said, "Oh, have you ever heard of God's Hotel? It's a fantastic book. You should read it." And I was like, "Oh, well, I'll download that to listen, on my way." So God's Hotel is by Dr. Victoria Sweet, and it's about her experience at the Laguna Honda Hospital in the San Francisco Bay Area and her discovery of Hildegard and asking herself, what would Hildegard do? And Dr. Sweet's an incredible physician. She's an amazing person. Highly recommend any and all of her books. Excellent. I mean, she's kind of like a Hildegard. She speaks languages, learns languages, and does all sorts of writing, and then is an excellent slow medicine physician is what she calls it. Anyway, she calls it slow medicine, what she practices. So I'm listening to this. I'm listening to her book, and I'm listening to the way that she's discovering Hildegard and how she's applying it to medicine for the body. And I'm listening to Hildegard, all this stuff about Hildegard, and I'm like, this just reminds me so much of Adler, like the slow medicine,
Mm-hmm.
the way that he would look at the whole person, and the way that Hildegard would look at the whole person in order to diagnose and to give a proper recipe and prayers and, everything that she did, it was for the whole person. And so that is why I ended up wedding them together, because I just kept getting like all of these aha moments while I was listening to this book and thinking, well, gosh, that's, like Adler does that, but it's for mental health, like applying it to mental health.
Mhm.
And so then looking at, so when I met Annetta Esser, and to talk to her about the guidebook, she is actually the one, this is the reason this book is happening. She's the one that said to me, I strongly encourage you and urge you to think about coming back in next year and talking about and doing a presentation at the International Hildegard Conference put on by Scivias, the organization that she is the director of. She said, I strongly, urge you to come back and talk about Hildegard and psychotherapy and do a presentation on that. And I was like, well, there's not really anything out there there's tons about her medicine, diets, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
It's very popular,
Mhm.
but not necessarily about mental health. And so,
Huh.
yeah. And so I said, what I have found research wise, just in a quick Google search, was that there were books about Hildegard and from a Jungian perspective, because a lot of Jungian analysts really get into Hildegard because of
Oh, interesting. Mhm.
because of the archetypal stuff that she represents, and her drawings or her depictions of her visions as mandalas, and just all of that kind of symbolism that
Mhm.
are in her visions. That Jungians love that stuff, and I actually go to a Jungian analyst myself, so I'm that's not a disparaging thing. It's just that that's really what they're into, and I thought, well, they're doing that. That's awesome. Like that's not my training, even though I appreciate the analysis as a tool. But and I was like, well, nobody's done anything about Adler, and she's like, well, that's because it's your work to do. I was like,
I love it.
thanks,
I love it.
Annetta. Yeah, and she's great. She's very dynamic. Also, another Hildegard spirited person. So that's how it all came together.
Wonderful. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is that you say that Hildegard's holistic approach to healing always began with a person's spiritual connection
Yes.
to God, the light, the living light. Um, and I was thinking, yeah, maybe that's where we should be starting today,
Mm-hmm.
was what it made me start to think.
Mm-hmm.
But um, how do we bring that approach, I suppose, into both physical medicine and psychological medicine? I mean, now that's just a word or two,
Sure. Yeah, I know,
No,
right? Yeah. So first of all, like the Hildegard, she called in some of her visions, she called this experience of God that she saw. She saw a light kind of behind the light, and she called that the living light.
Mm,
And that was the way that she would describe the divine. And I just think it's so beautiful. So yes, Hildegard being a medieval woman in a Christian world at that time, there was no other place for her to start except for with
yes.
God.
I wish it
So
was the
to
same
just
now. So,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So she just, there was like, it's like for her it would be a no-brainer. She'd be like, well, why would I start with medicine first? That would be weird. you know. So what because for her for her in her worldview, everything began and ended with God. Life began with
Mhm.
God, death ended with God, and the soul was on this journey. And she actually wrote a morality play called Ordo Virtutum. You can look it up on YouTube. There are renditions out there that are really kind of fun and interesting. But she wrote a morality play about the soul's journey and about the devil trying to ensnare you all the time. And so for her, the first thing that you would look at is what is your spiritual connection? Where is God calling you? If you're called to be a milkmaid, what's going on there? Are you being true to God's call? And where are you connecting to yourself inside with God, with the divine? And so the other thing that she did related to the living light is that she used this term viriditas, which was not a term she made up. It was something that had been used for centuries. But it's literally the color green, but then it's also like green sap. And so because she was studying plants and she was studying herbs and how to use them, and she was in this Benedictine monastery that had an infirmary, and she had to treat her own nuns, and she learned a lot, I am sure, just by being around the other Benedictine monks and what was going on in medicine there. So she was observing. She was a wonderful observer. She was observing what was going on with the plants and doing like experiments with them and testing them and seeing like, what is this juice, So it could also mean like green sap. And so viriditas is also translated kind of as the greening spirit. What she uniquely did was that she wedded the spiritual aspect to the physical aspect. And so viriditas for her also meant, what is the viriditas in you, that life force within you? How is that connected to the divine life force? How is that connected to God? And that is where healing begins. Because if you are not connected, or if you're cut off in some way, then how can God do anything with you?
Fascinating.
So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
What would you say is the most important takeaway that people could gain from this book?
So my ultimate goal is that you'll fall in love with both Hildegard and Adler. I mean, this book is just scratching the surface of both of them. I have an extensive works cited. I have an extensive bibliography, additional resources, all of that stuff so that you can do your own deep dives. But that's the biggest thing that I'm hoping, is that people will look at this and go, "Wow, I want to know more about each of these remarkable characters in history." And also just, the book has its own rhythm. It has, each chapter has its own reflection questions, and it has these little questions throughout called a Pilgrim Ponders. And it has a benediction at the end where you can do some embodied prayer from Hildegard's works that I created. And so, I really hope too that people will reflect on their own lives and see where their own viriditas might be blocked, and how for mental health. I mean, this is really specifically for mental health. So, and by all means, like this does not take the place of the care of a physician or your own mental health care provider, but it gives you some jumping off points to start exploring, like what does it mean to look at your mental health holistically,
Yeah.
and to ask for that if you're going to providers, to be able to have some vocabulary and some background to ask for something, for a person who wants to look at your whole person and not just a diagnosis.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this. And thank you for writing My Sap is Rising. I think that it really does give us a good window into the lives of both Hildegard and Adler.
Yes.
And into some of what you've just mentioned as well. And so thank you very much for that. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you for letting me be here. It's been such a joy, and it's always good to see you. And yes, you can find My Sap is Rising all over the place. You can buy it. If you buy it directly from me, from my website, I will send you swag. So that means like, bookmarks, postcards, stickers, things like that. So just a little plug.
Wonderful. Yes, and the information of your website and things will be in the show notes, so
Great.
people can connect that way. So
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you.
In today's episode, Danae, Ashley, and I have had a very insightful discussion about the mystical life of Hildegard von Bingen and how her work bridges spirituality and mental health through holistic healing. We also discussed the influence of Alderian psychology on holistic health and the importance of spiritual foundations in healing. I hope this has been as insightful for you as it has been for me. I am Christine Sine, author, liturgical rebel, keen gardener, and retired physician. I have been exploring out-of-the-box creative approaches to faith and spiritual practices for the last 30 years, and some of my insights are shared in my books, the most recent being Celtic Advent, Following an Unfamiliar Path, and The Gift of Wonder. I write regularly on Substack and conduct workshops and retreats about creative spiritual practices, Celtic Christianity, and the spirituality of nature. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast. Please also share it with your friends or join me on Substack, Instagram, or Facebook.